You're listening to an Anazao Ministries podcast.
What's up, you geeks? Welcome back to Systematic Geekology. It feels good to say that again. Guys, it's been a minute. I am here today for this month's What If episode with the one and only Christian Ashley. How we doing?
I'm all right, Joe. How about you?
Not too shabby. So before we get down to the festivities at hand, why don't you let the people know what you've been geeking out about?
Let's see. Recently, as of midnight last night, I finished playing the main story of Hogwarts Legacy. And I am in love with this game. It was so much fun. I mean, you'll probably hear me complain about this on another episode. The only things I have against it are the lockpicking minigame and the broom riding. Though I did get better along the way. But I love the story. I love the spell casting. It is everything I've wanted in a Harry Potter game for so long.
It's always special whenever you can see a fan base clamoring for a particular game. And while Harry Potter isn't necessarily my jam, there's a lot of crossover with I'm really big into what's called PokeTubing. It's Pokemon players that that do different run-throughs and playthroughs and all that kind of stuff on YouTube. And there's a lot of crossover with that crowd. They've having anticipated that game, and it sounds like pretty universally it's been met with acclaim from the fan base. So that's good.
Well, how about you?
I have been geeking out on exactly that, Pokemon playthroughs. There's different challenges. These different games have been around for forever, and so like some of the other IPs that are out there, the fan base has taken to different systems to create their own ROMs and stuff like that. And so I've been playing some different ROM hacks and different things like that, and watching playthroughs on YouTube. So that has been a blast.
You big Nuzlocker?
Yeah. I
love it.
There's only so many times that you can go through the actual mainline story. And so I personally enjoy getting a chance to see how the different game or how the different Pokemon play through and all of that kind of stuff, and nerding out on the numbers and the statistics and all of that kind of stuff.
It definitely enhances the love of the game because it can get a little boring after a while, especially as easier as the games get along. It's nice to bring a bit of challenge into it.
Yeah. There are some people on YouTube and some people that I know that they just really enjoy playing through the storyline with different Pokemon and different teams and stuff like that. And I'm like, all right, I mean, more power to you, but I'm with you when it comes to the actual storyline itself. I think that's probably the thing that gets the oldest. But adding different challenges on and seeing what the different creative communities can make from different ROM hacks and things like that, I think is pretty cool to see people be able to take an IP that's as old as Pokemon is and be able to turn it into something new with different creative ventures and all that kind of stuff. So, all right. So down to the festivities at hand. You guys asked, we're answering, and we are covering this month, what if a Kryptonian became a Jedi? And I'm interested to see, because you and I have covered other Star Wars adjacent topics before in the past, but I'm curious if you agree. It almost seems like this turns into a conversation of two parts. One, you kind of have to square the circle of what if the big blue Boy Scout became a Jedi, and then talk about what if a Kryptonian became a Jedi, because you pretty definitively see, even with Supergirl, that Superman is kind of the exception. Not all Kryptonians are that kind of have that same kind of mentality for truth, justice, and all of that kind of stuff.
Yes.
Whereas some of the other ones don't look as favorably on humanity.
Yeah, it can't all be from the House of L.
Yeah. So tell me, what do you think would happen if Kal-El became a Jedi?
Well, I think the biggest question from that becomes, when is he becoming a Jedi? I mean, are we talking prequel trilogy? Are we talking, if we're going with Legends, is he going to be in Luke's Academy? Is he going to be in the Knights of the Old Republic era? Like, we need to settle that first, I think, before we go anywhere else.
Yeah, I think it's funny because I didn't even think about it from that angle. I figured you were going to say when in terms of Superman's life. Is it pre being influenced by the Kents? Or is it this raw, humanoid being that doesn't have any of that influence and could be influenced in other directions?
That's why I brought it up, because I figured if it was prequel era, he doesn't get the tender loving care as much from Ma and Pa Kent. But if it's Luke era, maybe he was old enough at some point in time. Assuming that Krypton is part of, the Star Wars galaxy at this point, it blows up. He crash lands somewhere, what have you.
Right. So I think I think that raises an interesting point, because I think if you're talking about Knights of the Old Republic or prequel trilogy eras, I think you end up with like the epitome of what a knight would be. He seems like he's the type that would be influenced by the culture around him, influenced by the swaying around him. And so you take this being, because I mean, as far as we know, every sun that we see for the most part in the Star Wars galaxy is a yellow sun. So you would assume he's got his powers. So I think you end up with like the knight that would defend unquestioningly the virtues of the Jedi Order.
Yeah, I'd agree with that as well. Let's assume he's taken from a young age. He's only had maybe 3 or 4 years with the Kents. Some watchman finds him, and then he joins the Order as an apprentice. You've got someone who is going to follow the law to the letter. I mean, kind of in similar ways to what Windu would end up being like. And like, these are the rules, follow them. Breaking them is the most awful thing in the world you can do in some respects, especially with your Clone Wars Windu, as opposed to some of what Legends Windu did. But this is definitely going to be, he's going to be the paragon of the Jedi Order. Like, epitome is the best way to put it. Like you said, that's who he's going to be. No one is going to question his loyalty.
Right. It's funny that you bring up Mace Windu, because I was going to reference Mace Windu, but in a different context. Okay. After we're done with Soups, to how I think a Kryptonian, like any other Kryptonian, would end up taking to the Jedi Order, but we'll get there. Okay. What interests me is if we look ahead to Luke's Academy and a post-Empire world, I think you get more of the emotional side of Soups. I think in different contexts, either in the New 52 or Superman as a dad, you see his emotional tie to the things he loves, the people he loves. It's not so much about the rigid, I'm going to follow the rules to the very letter. It's more about, I'm going to defend the things that I care about and what's right. And I think for me, the more compelling character, or the more compelling version of the character, would be that Luke's Academy era Superman, because I think you get a Jedi that's more willing to, almost like a Qui-Gon figure. I think you'd end up with somebody who studies the Force and the prophecies and the, all of that kind of stuff. And like, really, for all of you DC fans out there, I think you get more of a Wally West Flash or like than a Barry Allen Flash. You know, somebody that has more of a almost religious relationship with the Force than it being used as a tool for a means of defending whatever virtue is in front of him.
Yeah. When I was thinking on this, I was thinking like, okay, either way, there's a Superman raised by the Jedi or Superman who ends up in Luke's academy. He's going to be dealing with the dark side at some point in time, but in different ways. I think for our prequel era Superman, we're going to have someone who's going to see how ineffective the law can be at times, how sticking so closely to the Order's codes can be. So we may end up in a Dooku situation at some point in time. I don't know if Superman would actually fall like Dooku did, because especially if we just watch the most recent, what were the Tales of the Jedi or whatever it was that they did, that we see Dooku, his essential descent into falling is because of how he was versus how he wanted to be. So we may see Superman in a situation like that. Now, Superman, who is raised in Luke's academy, where emotion is something that you're supposed to share, you're supposed to love others, you can have families. I can definitely see a scenario there where his emotions compromise him to the point where he is tempted by the dark side if something were to happen to someone that he loves. So that's something to consider there as well. But I don't think Superman would fall. It may be like Luke in that he did a little bit, but there's always people who bring him back, like whoever Jedi Lois Lane is in this universe.
Well, I think that's one of the intriguing things to think about when you think about a Superman that is a part of a system that is more emotionally based. Because you look at like New 52 Superman, for instance, he's younger, he's more emotional, and he doesn't really have that strong tether in the same kind of way to keep him from going off the rails. And so does that more emotional Superman go the same kind of way that we've seen some of the other Kryptonians go, where he doesn't have that upbringing and that way of being? Maybe, you know, the Jedi Order in and of itself is enough to keep him on the rails, but what happens if he disagrees with Luke and realizes that he has more power than the other Jedi? Does he just turn into okay, I have figured out, because all of this stuff is in flux way more than the previous versions of the Jedi Order are, because the previous orders are all like, this is the way you do it, this is what's right, this is what's wrong, this is black, this is white. Whereas we know in Legends continuity, things are a little bit more fluid. And so what happens if, because they're more fluid, he's more susceptible to, I think that things should go this way, Luke is wrong, so I'm just going to take him out and do it my way, a la something like Injustice.
I mean, you can even go with Legends as well, with what happened with Kip Duran and his fall, and how he used his power, abused it, and destroyed an entire planet with, what was it, the Sun Crusher or whatever, the Nostril of Palpatine, whatever happened the next time they built a new super weapon. I can definitely see, I mean, Superman would be that super weapon to an extent. I mean, we talked on the Versus episode of Anakin versus Luke, go check that out on Patreon, about how Jedi essentially are supposed to be demigods. Mm-hmm. Even more than the regular human, like even the ability just to like lift something up, that puts you way above other humans. But you didn't put all that on top of Superman having his abilities as a Kryptonian. That is a force to be reckoned with that no, Luke is going to have a hard time, as broken as he is. So, I mean, does Superman end up being kind of like a warlord in this situation if he were to fall? Does he end up in like a Red Sun situation where he ends up taking over the Soviet Union in that one? Does he make his own little fiefdom, his own little kingdom, a part of the galaxy? Does he take over the Empire, the Remnant, and then try to go from there? I mean, the speculations are endless in that regard if he falls.
So, in out of the characters that we know of in Star Wars, let's say Superman becomes essentially the new emperor, right? He is this dictator and warlord. Is there anybody that stands up to him to be able to, I guess, dethrone him?
That is an excellent question. I mean, depends on how he interacts with. Actually, Superman has always been weak to magic, and Sith magic would be essentially his. I mean, other than kryptonite, his kryptonite in this reality. So, I mean, if you can find someone smart enough to utilize kryptonite, you have a Lex Luthor figure. Like, if Black Sun were still around, probably not with Caesar. He's dead at this point in time. But if you had someone of that intellect, they could be a force to reckon with against him. But I think with Sith magic, on the other hand, if Shadow Spawn / Chronol, if he survives the events of Luke Skywalker and Shadows of Mindor, if he were able to fight Superman, I'd say that's something that would give him a lot of issue. If Palpatine were brought back again, that's something I would see as a huge issue. Or if he had to deal with Exar Kun coming back at the Jedi Academy, maybe that's why he falls in the first place.
Right. That would be that's one of the things that I find the most intriguing about the whole thing is, like, you take a figure like Exar Kun that you talk about master manipulator, right? Like you look at something like Injustice, and the Joker basically manipulates the entire situation to his ends, and you have somebody like Exar Kun that is not as driven by chaos and things like that as he is his specific agenda. And you have somebody with that ability to be able to manipulate into all of that. That there's, I think in my mind, there's no doubt that if Exar Kun got his hands on, proverbially, his hands on Supes, he turns him. Now the question is there a counterbalance that would be able to turn him back?
Well, I guess it all depends in that regard. Who are his relationships with? Who are his friends? I mean, does he have someone he loves in this continuity that we're creating right here and now? Because are he and Luke even friends?
Right.
In this situation, when Luke has a way with words, a masterful use of words that he is able to bring plenty of people back into the light. And if they are close, I think Luke could do it potentially. It would be a long and hard battle, but he's definitely not beating him one-on-one with Superman's abilities, unless he's able to trick him, or unless he's willing to go look into certain dark side magics that he'd be able to use against him, which I don't know if Luke would be willing to do that. Maybe. Depends on who's writing him, I suppose. It also depends, does he have a Lois Lane? Someone that he loves. I mean, is that Lois Lane being fridged by whatever version of the Joker we're using in this reality? Is that what pushes him over the edge to allow Exar Kun to take him over?
Right. Yeah, in my mind, I can absolutely see a version of the scene where at the end of Return of the Jedi, where you see the collection of Force Ghosts. I don't think I'm a little biased because I think Yoda's on the overrated side. I said it. But I think if you have a collection of Anakin, Luke, and Obi-Wan, and obviously Luke wouldn't be a Force Ghost, but Anakin and Obi-Wan would be. I think those three together would be enough to turn him back. You have the wordsmith of Luke. You have kind of this sage figure in Obi-Wan, and you have the guy that's kind of been there, done that in Anakin, to be able to say, like, yes, it is intoxicating to seek this power or to go to this side or all of those things. And I think the three of them combined would be able to draw him to a point of understanding that at this point, it's no longer as dogmatic as this is the right way, this is the wrong way, but it's a matter of keeping your emotions in check, while also focusing on doing good and all of those kinds of things.
I completely agree with that assessment. Sorry, while you were speaking, I was just thinking of something like this Superman we've created. Does he rely more on his Kryptonian powers or the Force?
What does that even look like for him to realize that he's got additional powers outside of the Force? Because I think if we're talking about he's a youngling and he's raised in the academy, or he's raised with this understanding that he has Force powers, does he even realize that he has extra power outside of just the Force, or what does that even look like? Or do they just automatically assume that he's a Sith because he's doing certain things that other Jedi wouldn't do, you know?
I guess it all depends on how widespread Kryptonians are in the galaxy. I mean, if you look at most comics, especially after, what was it, Infinite Crisis on Infinite Earths, they were very xenophobic and very insular and isolationist. So, I mean, we may have a Camino situation where no one knows where they are or what they're about, except for some random guy who owns a diner on Coruscant. And who knows from that point, like, do they know that Kryptonians can do this? Say either way, like, how would that look if they know or they don't know?
Right. Yeah. It's hard to think of a world where Kryptonians are widespread, because way more often than not, you have them at best isolated, at worst nigh extinct. So I think if it's widespread, then I don't think you're going to get any kind of mix up or anything like that. And I think that you probably end up in a situation where the Jedi teaching would be such that it would probably teach him to rely more on the Force than his, what for him would be natural abilities. If not, I think you would almost need. I think if not, you have a heightened chance that he ends up as a Sith if he's born in the prequel era, and specifically in the prequel era. But I think if Knights of the Old Republic era or Legends continuity, I think you would have enough reasonable voices around that aren't dogmatic that would end up being able to still take him in and show him the way, sort of thing.
Yeah, something you said there sparked a memory of Justice League Unlimited. There's a scene there when he's fighting against Darkseid, and he gives a speech about how the world around him is basically made out of cardboard. So he's always having to hold it in, to not always unleash his full potential. And if we see a Superman who is focusing more on his Force abilities and is denying his natural talent and being told, especially in a prequel era setting, don't use this, don't do any of this, I definitely agree. I see a Superman who's way easier to seduce to the dark side because he's been told what you are is wrong, or what you are shouldn't be what you should be. You should be this instead.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you almost end up in a similar vein to, honestly, to Anakin in that regard. It might not be motivated by the exact same things, but I think you definitely end up with somebody that has been told you have to do this, you have to do that, this is right, this is wrong, and because it's only that, you're going to end up driving him away from that way of thinking or what have you, into what to him seems like a more inclusive group. You know what I mean? It's almost like life imitating art, imitating life. I'm just saying.
Yeah, I think if we say it's not the prequels, we'll say it's Luke's era, and Luke is aware of his abilities, Luke's going to foster that. He's going to say, use both. It's like, can you imagine what you're capable of? I mean, Luke would probably give some warnings and be like, hey, don't let it get to your head. Right. I mean, you're still only Kryptonian. You can't solve everything. I think that Superman would be a lot better off in that situation for Kal-El in this instance. And that way he's able to embrace both And I think he might still deny part of his Kryptonian natural ability to focus on the Force itself in this scenario, because maybe things get a little too easy, and maybe he does something. He gets so proud of himself that something bad happens, and someone he was a hostage he was supposed to save dies, and instead of that, denying himself, he would in humbleness use both. But I think focus more on the Force.
Right. Yeah, I think you'd almost need that specific version of Luke, because with the short snippet that we got of Josh's favorite cranky old man Luke, that because he was still so much of, deny relationships, deny personal things, or like even younger, was it Mandalorian that he showed up in? Yeah.
Book of Boba Fett.
It was Book of Boba Fett. Okay. I couldn't remember if it was Mandalorian or Mandalorian season 3.5.
Well, I can't imagine how you would ever think that.
Yeah, right. That I think either of those versions of Luke, I think would make the mistake that the people who came before him made and all of that. But I think if you end up with books Luke that recognizes the error of the previous way and is knowledgeable in the teachings of the Jedi that came before him, and is able to find all of this ancient Jedi literature and all of that kind of stuff, I think then you end up with honestly the best version of a Jedi Superman, and one that is prepared for, like you said, Sith magic, that he would be able to be a part of a collective and not fall prey to that, because eventually somebody's going to figure out the gimmick that this nigh unstoppable force can be stopped by magic.
Yeah. Well, even too, and like in this scenario, Krypton explodes. It's in this galaxy. I mean, does the Phantom Zone exist? Is Zod out there somewhere? That could be a huge factor as someone who could possibly take Superman down, depending on if Zod has force sensitivity as well. Oh gosh, what are the other two names? Like Ursa and other guy?
Yeah, I don't remember.
I mean, and of course, maybe Supergirl's alive as well in this continuity, because she was also taken off planet around the same time as Clark. Well, Kal-El, I should say. I mean, that could be a motivating factor for him too. Is like protecting her. Is she force sensitive as well? Is that a family thing?
Right.
Or is he the only one with it? So, yeah, definitely. I agree. This version we've created, trademarked right now, of Superman, I think is going to be one of the best Jedi we've ever seen in existence.
Yeah. Yeah. Speaking of Supergirl, I'll go out on a limb and say I fundamentally believe that Supergirl becomes a Sith. I think she's emotional enough, like just the way that she's been written, like throughout different iterations. She's always been had a harder edge to her than Supes did, because she grew up on Krypton, because she wasn't raised in the same way that Supes was. That if that's still the case, I think she absolutely becomes either a Sith or a Dark Jedi.
I see, especially with more modern interpretation of Supergirl, instead of what we used to get as more happy-go-lucky kind of way. Not saying there's anything wrong with either characterization. No. This more modern take on Supergirl would most definitely be more prone to falling to the dark side, assuming she had force sensitivity. And if not, I mean, she's still a force to be reckoned with.
Right. So shifting gears here, what happens if a Kryptonian outside of the House of El has force abilities and all of that? Do they become a Jedi or do they become a Sith?
Once again, it's going to depend on when they're being, becoming a Jedi. And I would definitely agree with what we said before with prequel era. You try and suppress that Kryptonian heritage and deny who you were, especially depending on how old this child is. when they're taken to the Order, I think we've got the makings of a new Sith Lord on our hands.
Yeah. Yeah, this one I'm a little less, I guess, I think this one's a little less situational, in my opinion. I think this one's pretty cut and dry, that we've seen pretty categorically that Kryptonians are an emotional race. And I think that with anybody that, the story of Superman really comes down to the Kents. And I think when you don't have the Kents, you pretty categorically end up with somebody that's way more susceptible to becoming a Sith or a Dark Jedi. I think if you go to somebody like Zod, I think you end up with the preeminent Dark Jedi. I think you end up with somebody that absolutely will take that power, realize that. I don't think he'll be closed-minded enough to become specifically a Sith, but I think it'll be a case of understanding power and the desire for power enough to marry those worlds and end up as a Dark Jedi.
Yeah, I think you hit it on the nail when you mentioned Ma and Pa Kent. They are the key factor here in the influence that they have over Kal-El or any other, say some other Kryptonian was born with them, and they raised him. Without their influence, without their love and tender care, we don't get Superman. I mean, all you have to do is see all these other, Superman Gone Bad TV shows. What do? You don't give him Ma and Pa Kent. Or you do, and you kill them off. Like, you get your Brightburns, you get your Homelanders, so on and so forth. That's what part of made Superman who he is how he was raised. And without that influence, I see things going very poorly for him. Or even if they were to be killed in such a manner to make him go off the deep end.
Yeah. And I think also on that note, I think you run into an issue because he's prone to romantic relationships. We've seen it in different iterations. Sometimes it's Wonder Woman, sometimes it's Lana Lang, and most often it's Lois Lane. You're in an order that says, no, you can't do that. That's wrong. I think you're going to end up with a Superman that is more willing to look outside of the parameters. You know what I mean?
Well, also remember, Lucas said they can have relationships. They just can't. Well, sorry, they can have, sexual relationships, but they can't have families or anything like that. So he'd be able to have those, but at the same time, that's not Superman. He wants commitment. And we'd end up with an Anakin situation once again, if that were the case.
Yeah, for sure. I think, honestly, if you have widespread Kryptonians that have force powers, sure, you'd probably end up with some instances of them joining the Jedi Order. But I think way more often than not, honestly, I almost wonder if it's more than just soups. If this is a world where it's plural, you end up with soups being an exception and, people almost fearing him being a part of the Order because of other Kryptonians that have gone to the dark side and things like that. But if there is no soups and it's just Kryptonians in general, and what would a Kryptonian do? I think that you end up with a situation where Kryptonians become like the feared race in existence.
Oh, absolutely. In that scenario, I mean, there's no way people trust them.
Right.
And, God forbid you are trained by the Jedi, you're going to be born with that stigma around you. So, I mean, you're even still at that moment susceptible to the dark side even further because of racial prejudice.
Yeah. I almost wonder if that really, like, if that's the route that it would go, where you would end up with such a distinct prejudice against Kryptonians that even for the ones that are oriented towards doing good, that it would almost turn into a self-fulfilling prophecy of, perpetuating the issue. You know what I mean?
Oh, absolutely. In that scenario right there, that's exactly what you're going to create. That fear of something that you did have a legitimate fear of in the past is now going to become reality because you're so focused on what could be rather than what you can do about what's happening here and now.
Right. Right. Yeah. I don't know. Are there any other Kryptonians that you can think of that would stand the same kind of chance of becoming a Jedi as Supes? I guess you could argue Supergirl, especially if she's in Knights of the Old Republic era. I think you end up with in a very similar boat of this is somebody who is like the ultimate knight defending, all of that kind of stuff. But I think at best, and this is what I was going to reference before with Mace Windu, I think at best you may end up, if it's prequel era, you find somebody, if they're able to stay on the light side, you still end up with somebody who's going to tap into just ever so just right to that line of flirting with the dark side in order to gain some of that power, but still within the confines of the Jedi Order.
Yeah, not let yourself be consumed by it.
Right.
Yeah. You mentioned Kryptonians. Off the top of my head, the only names that are coming up are Jor-El and what is Superman's son's name? Connor?
No, that's his clone,
that's Superboy, the clone.
Yeah,
right?
Jonathan.
Okay. Jonathan. Okay. Yeah, named after his dad. Okay. I'm not that familiar with what's happening with Jonathan Kent right now, although I understand a lot of people really love him and they seem like he's a paragon like his dad. So I'm very happy about that. But as far as, let's say Jor-El becomes a Jedi, how do you think that's going to be handled?
It's funny because you see varying degrees of utilitarianism out of Jor-El. A lot of times it's just, it's black and white. This is what we need to do for the best possible outcome sort of thing. And I think depending on the situation and almost like who gets to him first, you either end up with like the Jedi Master that redefines what the Order is, or you end up with another Emperor Palpatine.
I'm going to take it in a different direction. I think he may be the Jocasta Nu of his timeline, the librarian. He may be the archivist or maybe their head researcher because he's very scientifically minded. And I don't think, and that's one thing Jedi do encourage is scientific pursuit and the pursuit of knowledge itself. So I could see that happening. Now, as far as Connor Kent is as Superboy, very more emotional than even Superman.
Yeah.
So I see him way easier for him to fall at some point in time, especially with how he's created. And then John Kent again, we're just saying, well, he's probably been born and raised with Superman as his dad. He's probably going to end up the same way, from what I understand with how he's handled in the comics.
Yeah, I think if anybody's going to end up like Dooku, I think it's going to be Connor, because if he's written the same way, he's very prone to comparing himself and imposter syndrome and all of that kind of stuff. So I think he's always going to be comparing himself against somebody else, be it if he's in the same world as Cal, or if it's somebody else. I think you're going to end up in a situation where he's going to fall prey to comparing himself to somebody else and ending up ultimately on the dark side. See, I would think Jonathan Kent would end up being like the Jocasta Nu of this world, because he is being written similarly to Superman, but they're giving him even more of an emotional edge. Like it's almost like, honestly, if I had to compare it to the characterization of anybody else, it would almost be like how Gohan is written in comparison to Goku. where there's some of that same edge, some of that same power, but it's being married with more of a human streak. You know what I mean? And I would think that that would probably lead him to having an increased interest in exploration, in chronicling, all of those kinds of things. I guess it depends on what aspect of that kind of role you're emphasizing. Because if it is science and archival and being like the old knowledgeable one, then yeah, you probably end up leaning more towards Jor-El. But if it's more about exploration and stuff like that, I think that kind of mentality almost has Connor in a mix between like that scientist chronicler or somebody who like makes the knight, like the Jedi Knight. You know, somebody who's not afraid to get into battle, you know, do what needs to be done, all of that kind of stuff, and isn't so tied to, you know, being about the way and all of that kind of stuff that they become a master. Somebody who's more interested in the adventure of it all and all of that, and so stays at that knight level. Almost like in a way that they elect, like I could see Jonathan Kent electing to stay a knight, not becoming a master. You know what I mean? Because I think if it's the line of Superman, you almost have this. It's a given that he would have the skill set to become a master. But it almost seems like that role wouldn't fit his personality type, at least not where he's at currently in the comics.
Well, I'm glad you said that, because all my knowledge of him is very tertiary. Like, I've not read anything that he's been in. So all I've got is other impressions people have left me. So to hear that side of him, that's something completely new to me. And I like it as a way to diversify him from his dad, but also keep him true to the spirit of who Superman is supposed to be. I love it.
Yeah, I was slow to come around on Jonathan Kent, but more so because I was trepidatious because of what they were doing with the Justice League. It was right after they quote unquote killed off the Justice League in this last crisis. And so I'm like, I don't know about all this. You know what I mean? It had very little to do with his actual character, but the way that they were, the way that they ended up writing him and all that, not to mention, I was a really big fan of Super Sons. One of my low key gripes is that didn't become more of a thing, and that they aged up Jonathan and all of that. Like, I thought Super Sons was amazing, and I would have loved to have seen Jonathan be on the Teen Titans and all of that, and like go the same kind of way that Damian did. That's neither here nor there. But I think that now that they are trying to give him more of his own characterization and not just make him Superman light, that he's actually becoming more like a better all around character, and gives him at least enough personality that at least at this stage you could make that inference without just being like, yeah, he's like Superman, so just copy and paste everything that we've said about Clark, because they're two different characters.
That's really good to know. I'm glad that's working out for him, because when they first announced him, I was like, oh gosh, here we go again. Yeah. But that's been handled way better from what I understood at the very beginning. So I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm of the generation that grew up with the death of Superman and the reign of the Supermen and all of that. So I remember those comic runs. So it's always that, you know, are we just trying to do Connor again? Are we just trying to do, you know, John Henry Irons and that sort of, you know, somebody who's inspired by and all that kind of stuff? But no, they're trying to do a different direction for him than previously. Yeah, I think there's enough personality difference between the various versions of Kryptonians that if you were to have any one individual ones. I think we've done well to compartmentalize each one of them. The one thing I will say is that if you have the Superman family, if you've got Cal, if you've got Cora, Kara, yeah, and the whole nine yards. I think they kind of keep each other honest in a way. I think you either I don't think I see all of them going to the dark side. I think you see most of them staying on the light side, or you end up with everybody kind of as gray Jedi. You know, not to go back to that trope, but I think that you almost end up with this house that is its own subsect of the Jedi Order.
I'm not the one you have to warn about liking Grey Jedi. I was very positive on where they were going with that until they decided to character assassinate Verger and then say that she was a Sith all along. But you know what? Whatever.
Yeah. Do you think any of them end up becoming like Mandalorians or anything like that? Like part of the Mandalorian race? Not race, order?
Like, yeah. I mean, Connor may be our best bet here.
Yeah.
If he leaves the Order at some point in time, like he's had enough.
Right.
He's choosing a different path. I could see him joining the Mandalorian.
Oh, dude, could you imagine another Jedi Mandalorian war, but head up by two Kryptonians?
Oh, that'd be amazing.
Yeah. DC, Lucasfilms, Disney, the whole nine yards. Everybody's listening because we all know y'all are listening. That one's for free. That just book us to write it. It'll be fine.
We've got this.
Yeah.
You know where to contact us.
Yeah, that would be. I think that would be a lot of fun to see Connor become a Mandalorian, because I think he would end up that. Who's the other one? Not Connor. Maybe I am just thinking of Connor, but aren't there two clones? One that's good, one that's bad. Superboy Prime, and then
he's from a different universe,
right?
Yeah.
He, I think, would become either an absolute warlord or like the Mandalorian. You know what I mean? I think like he would either end up like the head of a warrior race, or just straight up going after power and becoming like the next emperor.
I could definitely see that, as conceited as he is, as power hungry as he is, most definitely.
Yeah. So let's go ahead and head into the wrap up. What recommendations do you have for the lovely listeners?
Let's see. For those of you out there who are big fans of the old Trigun anime, there is currently airing in this season Trigun Stampede, which is from a different alternate world kind of take on the ideas. It's been very fun. Get over the CGI. It is what it is. Enjoy the story. It's got my boy Nicholas D. Wolfwood there with his giant cross gun. It's amazing. It's epic. I love it.
I'm gonna go with in the same flavor as the beginning, what I've been geeking out on. There's a particular ROM hack that's out there for Pokemon that if you're into Pokemon and you're into the earlier versions of Pokemon, there's one called Crystal Clear that you can go through the Kanto and Johto regions, but it's open world, and you can choose what town you start in and what order you go through everything. And it's got all was it 252 or something like that? 250 from the first two generations. It might be the best ROM hack out of all of them that I've played, and I've been doing this now for a couple of months. I feel like I've played a fair few of them, but at least for the ones that are GBC or GBA emulators, that one I would say, at least for that era of them, it's the best.
So is there like level scaling? Like if you go to a gym at a certain town, they'll have a different team at a different level?
Yes. So
that is so great. I love it.
Yeah. So all trainers level scale based off of where you're at.
That's beautiful. I love when people are so creative to do stuff like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I just beat Radical Red Nuzlocking it a month ago, and nice. I was pulling out hair that doesn't exist anymore. So I'm looking for a new challenge. I have to check this out.
Yeah, Radical Red was probably the most frustrating rum hack that I've played so far. That was hard. Namely because I'm not usually the type of player that does that uses stat effect moves, and you very much have to be that sort of player in order to do that.
Yeah, I'm attack. Attack didn't work, attack again.
Yeah.
I feel you.
So with that, we bring this episode in for a close. If you have listened to this and you want to hear more wonderful what ifs or just more from the panel of hosts, you can head on over to systematicgeekology.org, find our full catalog of episodes from the last year and a half, as well as find the host tab where you can see what other shenanigans the panel is up to with the various other projects and goings on. And if you are so inclined and would like even more bonuses and to help keep the lights on, you can head on over to patreon.com/systematicgeekology and go ahead, throw a couple of bucks in the kitty. And like I said, there are tons of bonus materials over there for our wonderful supporters. We believe highly in providing value for those, well, in general, but especially for those of you that help us keep the lights on. But for now, I want you guys to remember one very important thing. We are all a chosen people, a geekdom of priests.
This was an Anazao Ministries podcast. If you enjoyed this show and would like to learn more about our network, be sure to check out the Anazao Ministries Podcast Network.